Introduce you. Yeah, people are going to be drifting in. People are still parking out there. But I tell you, we had an amazing morning. And Pastor Colby Martin, you have just brought such joy to the Synod Assembly, Delaware, Maryland Synod, to me personally. As you all know, Pastor Martin is the author of Unclobber. And as I shared in our worship services...
Or if you look at the sign behind you, the author of Uncobbler.
It's how
to take shoes apart. It's all about how to destroy shoes.
Oopsie.
I saw that earlier and got a kick out of it, so yes.
That's awesome.
Anybody got shoes that work? I can break them for you. You can uncobble them.
That is awesome. Okay, so you are multi-talented. You write books and uncobbler
that's right.
shoes.
Look at your shoes. They have lights. Oh, that's exciting. That's fun.
So also he's the author of Shift. His reading is required reading at our seminary. And from here, actually, you're going to be heading on to Gettysburg to United Lutheran Seminary. And so we're going to be mindful to get you out of here no later than 3:30ish. You got a long drive ahead this evening. So it is all you, brother. Have fun.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Let's hear it for Pastor Karis. Fantastic human. And the thing is about the title of my book, it's a made-up word, unclobber. That's not a real word. It's a word that I made. I'll talk about here in a little bit why I made it. But fun fact, the world most of the time calls it unclobbered with an ED at the end. Like, I kid you not, 80% of the time when I'm out in the world, people say, I read your book, Unclobbered. I think to myself, no, you didn't, because I didn't write that book. You could even go to Amazon and you can type in Colby Martin and it will autofill Unclobbered, because that's how most people search for it. So I don't know why that's the case, but I think people, they read it and then they have this experience of something happened in them. And so when they think about it, they feel like it was unclobbered, like there was an experience there. I don't know. But so I'm not new to having that made-up word be spelled wrong. It's totally fine. That was fun. Well, hey, welcome. Thanks for coming back. I recognize, I think, most of you from one of the services this morning. And for those of you, this is your first time here today, so glad that you have come back. And you're going to spend some time. What I'd like to do is I want to spend about the next hour or so talking a little bit about God, a word about God, then a word about me, then a word about you, then a word about we, the collective us. And so I start with a word about God. In the beginning, before there was anything, the author of the creation poem in Genesis said that there was darkness, and the Spirit hovered. And God spoke and said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light and called it good. Have you ever stopped to ask why? Like, what's so good about light? Lets you see the world. Jim, I like where your head's at. It can't just be that light in and of itself is good. It can't be. It can't be that light is good and dark is bad. Because we've seen where that trajectory of thinking takes us, that sort of dualistic, binary thinking, light good, dark bad. We've seen the outplay of that, and that's not good. So it can't just be that light is good and dark is bad, because you are blind in 100% light just as you are in 100% dark. So, like Jim pointed out, what if the reason why light is good in this context is because when you have a mixture of light with a mixture of dark, you get contrast. You get to see what otherwise could not be seen. But you have to have both. That's Genesis chapter 1. If you go forward a little bit to Genesis chapter 11, you get to a story that oftentimes is called the story of the Tower of Babel. You're familiar with the Tower of Babel? Now, I grew up being taught and being told that this was a story about the arrogance of humanity. And a number of years ago, I was reading it, and something else stood out to me, interesting about this story. So as you read this story, it talks about all of the people of earth had one language, one tongue, one culture. And they came together and they said, let us make a name for ourselves. Let's make a name for ourselves. And the way we can do that is we can build a tower that will take us up into heaven. And God looks at this and sees this project the people are setting out to do, and God thinks, oh crap. That's my translation. That's not an actual Hebrew. Oh crap. They just might pull this off. They just might pull this off. Now, why might that be something that would concern God? Well, something interesting happened if you go back and you try to trace the evolution of humanity, there was something interesting that happened during the period of time when humans began to change from being a roaming group of sort of gatherers into taming agriculture. Yuval Noah Harari calls this sort of the great deception, where our ancestors thought it would be better to settle down into one place, to stop sort of roving and chasing our food everywhere, and begin to tame the earth and tame the beasts, to stay in one place so they wouldn't have to travel so much, and begin to build. Now they can build larger cities and larger cultures because they're in one place. But what happened is we slowly began to lose touch with a number of things, including losing touch with the earth, losing touch with the rhythm of the seasons, losing touch with sort of knowing the different parts of what plants were good, what plants were bad. And we began to just all do like one crop and tame beasts. And this transformation, best as we can tell in this evolution of civilization, wasn't necessarily good. It afforded the expansion of cities, yes, but we lost a lot of things in the process. Now, why do I bring that up? Because when I read this story of the Tower of Babel, and you've got one people, one tongue, one culture, saying, let's make a name for ourselves. And then you have God saying, oh no, they might actually pull this off. And do you remember what God does in this story? God mixes up all of the languages, scatters them abroad. God introduces a kind of plurality within what used to be a uniformity. There used to be one tongue, and then God scatters them into many different tongues. That's interesting. And then fast forward to Acts chapter 2, and now you have the advent of the church. So you know the story that Jesus taught for a number of years. He was crucified by the state. He was buried in the tomb. He rose from the dead. He hung out with folks for a little while, and then he ascended into heaven. Something like the first Sabbath or so after that, not too long after that, the disciples are sitting around, probably really confused about what to do next. And you can imagine the highs and the lows and the highs and the lows as, oh, we're following this guy, we're giving our whole entire life for him. Oh no, he's been arrested and killed by the state. Oh, but he's back from the dead. This is going to be great. Now everything's going to kick into gear, but oh, now he left us again? And so they're sitting there that first Sabbath, sitting together, wondering, what on earth do we do? And the author of Acts describes this moment where it was like tongues of fire alighted on people. You can imagine the guy who was writing it down. I don't know if it was like a scribe who was kind of writing whatever the author of Luke or Acts said, or if it was the author himself. But you can imagine that moment of like, tongues of fire? Like, really? That's what you want to go with? Like, yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. It's what it was like. Okay, tongues of fire. And you know, this is the story of Pentecost, where the followers of Jesus were gathered together, all speaking their one language. They were all Galileans. And yet, around the gathering on the outside, suddenly people started to what? They heard it in what? Multiple languages, their own languages. They could understand it. And they started thinking, hey, wait a minute. Those are Galileans, and yet I'm a Syrophoenician or whatever. I'm an Egyptian. Why is it that I hear it in my language? What is going on? I look at this moment, the story in Acts chapter 2, and for me, this feels like it's one of those moments where the Spirit of God, she sees what's happening. She sees the momentum starting to build for this following in the way of Jesus. And it's almost like she says, this is not going to be one more movement where everybody has to look the same and talk the same and act the same and think the same. Not on my watch. And it's almost like in that moment, the Spirit of God, I call this the story, the queering of the church, where the Spirit of God's like, no, we're not doing that again. We're not building another empire. Now, I tell you these three stories, the introduction of light and how light and dark and the combination of those two creates contrast, and that's good. And the moment where the divine sees the humanity sort of coalescing under one language, one tongue, one culture, and says, that's not a good path for you, and then scatters them with different languages. And then the moment when the church begins to have its origins and the Spirit of God introduces a kind of difference into it. When I look at these three stories, and I can't help but notice this, there seems to be a divine preference for difference. There seems to be a divine preference for difference. The way of, you might say empire, it's a language the Bible uses a lot. The way of empire is about conformity, uniformity. Everybody looks the same, talks the same. Think of stormtroopers in the Star Wars world. Everybody is the same. This is empire. But the divine seems to have this bent towards diversity, plurality. Not sameness, not uniformity. There is a divine preference for difference. When I think about, and we prayed it this morning, what we call the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus taught his disciples to pray, it was centered around this idea of God, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So one way to think of it is this. How do we know what it looks like when God's kingdom and God's will or God's dream for creation, how do we know what to look for when that is occurring on earth as it is in heaven? And I think one way we can know that God's dream for creation is manifesting on earth as it is in heaven is when we see diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of look, diversity of background, diversity of sexuality, diversity of gender. When we see there is a divine preference for diversity, this is what I want to start out by establishing with you. That when we think about God, may we think about a God who bends towards diversity, not sameness, not uniformity, and certainly not conformity. So this is a word about God. Now, a word about me. Okay, so who am I? My name is Colby Martin. I'm the author of Uncobbler. I'm very against peach cobbler. I'm very against apple cobbler, just all the cobblers.
Diversity cobbler.
Yeah, yes. And I like to say, hi, my name is Colby, and I'm a recovering Baptist. So I was born and raised in the Baptist world. My dad comes from a long line of Baptists and Mennonites. And growing up I was the middle child of three brothers. Growing up, we were in church multiple times a week. That's just what we did. Sunday school, youth group, choir practice, all the cantatas. I miss cantatas. Do Lutherans have cantatas? Is that a word? I see blank looks. Okay. Well, cantata. Go look it up. I had to look up Scrapple. You can look up cantata. So, okay, yes, thank you. I have one who wants to remind me. Yes, we'll talk later. So that was my world growing up. Conservative Baptist. I grew up in Oregon. And my parents divorced when I was 8, 9, 10. Not entirely sure. The memory's a bit fuzzy. It was also a long, protracted separation, messy divorce that traumatized me in all sorts of ways. And my mom kept my brothers and myself in the Baptist world for a little while in the same church we were going to. But back in this would have been late 80s, early 90s, the Baptists weren't super cool with divorce. You know, I don't know if you know this about the Baptists. They can get kind of high and mighty on their moral high horse. And so my mom and my brothers, as my mom tells it, started to not feel super welcome or connected or feel good anymore in the church, right? And so she found a different church home for us, a generic evangelical church. And that was where I spent my formative high school years. And then I had an event happen one time. And if you've read the book on Clobber, then you know a bit about this story already. But I was going into my senior year of high school, and we were going on a youth trip from Oregon down to Huntington Beach down in the Southern California area. And the event was called SEMP, S-E-M-P, Students Equipped to Minister to Peers. And the goal, or the purpose of the conference was to train high school students in the art of apologetics. Do you know this word, apologetics? It's a fancy word that means how to prove that I'm right and you're wrong, but like wrap it in God language. It's real weird. So they would train you in the morning on how to do street witnessing, and then they would send you out 2 by 2, because that's biblical, into the beaches of Southern California. And they would have you go, I'm not even kidding you, they would have us go up and interrupt people who were just on vacation and say, hi, my name is Colby, and I'd like to ask, if you were to die right now, do you know where you would go? What a great icebreaker. I mean, people were just so thrilled to talk after that. You can imagine. Do you know, if you were to die right now, what's about to happen? And so we're out there trying to, because in the Baptist world, and many of the evangelical world, the whole point of evangelism and the whole concept of salvation is if you can get someone to say what we call the sinner's prayer, if you can get them to just admit that they're a sinner and that they believe that Jesus died for their sins, then ask him into their heart, then they get saved. And it's a rather rudimentary process that we were led to believe if you can just get someone to recite the words, then literally their name would be written in the book of life, and then they're good to go. All sorts of problems there in my mind, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. But I was out there as a 17-year-old talking to people about this, what I just shared with you, claiming to have a relationship with God through Jesus myself, and saying, you can too. But what happened, y'all, was I get back to the room that I was staying at on that first afternoon, and I get into the room. It's a dorm room on the campus of Biola, and I lay down on my bed and I just start weeping, which was a new experience for me. Like, now in my life, I'm a pretty easy cry, but back then, thank you, but back then I super disconnected from my emotional landscape. See the aforementioned traumatic divorce of my parents? Yeah, that'll mess you up. So no connection to my emotional landscape, but for some reason I'm laying on that bed just sobbing. And I'll tell you the story as I understood it then, even though now I might have a different way to talk about it. But for 17-year-old Colby, I remember hearing God, not like in an audible voice way, but I remember hearing God say, this is a moment where you get to choose. You get to choose one of 2 paths. The first path, you can keep going as you are going. And that path is, life is all about Colby. That's really the path I was on at that point, which, let's be honest, typical teenager, right? Life was all about me. Church for me at that point was just one more thing that I did. I didn't really take it seriously. It wasn't in here at all. It was just a thing that I did. But life was really just all about me. How can I get more friends? Or how can I be more popular? How can I be more funny? All of that. God's like, you can go on that path. It's up to you. Or you can make your life about something more than yourself. You can make your life about me and my glory. Again, that's the language I understood it back then. And what I realized happening, and I don't remember if I made this connection in that moment or years later, but what happened, the reason why I was so broken open was because I was experiencing the exposure of being a fraud. I was out there on the beaches telling people about how to have a relationship with God through Jesus when I myself knew nothing of what that meant. And the incongruity of those things, it broke me. It broke me. And so in that moment, I said, okay, God, I choose you. I choose living life for and about you and for and about the gospel, and I want this to be what my life is about. At that point, prior to that point, I was planning to travel back east. I was almost an East Coaster, y'all. I was planning to come back east to study graphic design, but instead, that week became the week in my life where I felt called to ministry. I felt called to be a pastor. I felt like that's what I want to give my life for. And that's what I've been doing for the last 22 years. So I come back from that experience, and I start taking things real seriously. I join the youth group worship team. I start leading Bible studies. I was going into my senior year of high school. As I said, I was the student body president, and I was using that platform, if you will, to talk about Jesus incessantly, which I'll be honest with you, had to have been super annoying for people. I think I was what you might call oversaved. It was just like, slow down, that's a little too much. But I was, to use evangelical speak, I was on fire for the Lord. It was truly something I was passionate about. And I went to college, studied pastoral ministry, learned all of the tools of the trade for Bible study and interpretation and ancient languages and how to exegete and all of that. Got my degree in pastoral ministry, got a job at a church, and this is going somewhere, obviously. Got a job at a church in Salem, Oregon. And at that time, upon graduation, I was doing really well as an evangelical. Like, I was on a path towards, I was really good at it, is my point. I was really good at knowing the right answers. I was really good at having a Bible verse for everything. Evangelicals love having a Bible verse for everything. I was on a path where I would have done really well. And then I started reading books that would not have been on the approved reading list for my Baptist professors. And I started to experience the following phenomena, which can be summed up like this. Wait, what? You mean there's been other ways that Christians have thought about things for the last 2,000 years? I'm not kidding you. The Baptists, bless their hearts, they think it was like Jesus, Peter, Paul, don't really worry about all of the rest of that, Baptists. Like this perfect, unbroken line of truth that we have the corner, we have the insight on. And I started reading and learning about all these different traditions and denominations and expressions of Christianity, all the different kinds of Christianities, plural, that existed within the first few hundred centuries before it was all unified under one idea. And it began to give me permission for two things. One, it began to give me permission to ask questions, like seriously ask questions, not just ask questions and then get the rote answer that you're supposed to regurgitate. So I started asking questions, and I started getting permission to have the answer to some of those questions be, I don't know. And those three words terrified me at that point in my life, because I thought you have to have be prepared, whether in season or out season, to give an answer for the hope that I thought I had to have an answer for everything. But I felt this permission to just sit in mystery, maybe not know, and start to ask questions. And so I started to give myself permission to audit some parts of my faith. There was a moment in 2007, I'm working at this church in Salem, and I'm getting ready to be licensed through the denomination. The denomination was Christian Missionary Alliance. Anybody know what that is? CMA? A few people know Christian Missionary Alliance. Neither here nor there. It's just kind of a conservative Christian denomination. And I'm getting ready to be licensed in it because my brother and his fiance wanted me to marry them. So I had to be able to marry people. And I'll never forget, one day I'm studying the Policies and Procedures Manual for the denomination because I had this interview coming up and I had to be able to, answer all their questions. And I'm walking through the lobby of the church on my lunch break, and I'm reading the policy manual, and suddenly I stop on this one line. And the line reads, "Practicing homosexuals cannot be members of the church." And I remember thinking, but what if they're really good at it? No, I'm kidding. Some of you will get that later. They're like, what's so funny about that? You'll get it later. No, I remember practicing homosexuals cannot be members of the church. I remember thinking, wait a minute. That's the outflow of that theology? Like that's how we treat. Like at that time, I was firmly rooted in the conservative traditional perspective on human sexuality, and I had the right answer, which is, you know how that is often stated. But for the first time, I noticed in my heart this sense of, oh, but really? Like that's what that means? And I kept reading and read about how they can't serve in children's ministry and they can't be leaders in the church. Certainly they can give tithes and offerings if they want, but they can't be in any position to actually say what they do with the offerings. And that was a moment where, for me, I describe it in the book as I noticed this lack of alignment between my head and my heart. They were not on the same page anymore. There was this broken connection there. I didn't do anything about it at the time other than notice it, just observed, wow, that's interesting. I should come back to that someday. And fast forward a couple years, I'm now at a mega evangelical church just outside of Phoenix, Arizona. And I had, for the last few years at that point, been going through this auditing process of different beliefs that I'd held, giving myself permission. I talk about sometimes beliefs as like a Jenga tower. You know that obnoxious game that you play with kids one time and then you're like, I'm never doing that again. Jenga, you pull out the little blocks on the bottom of the tower and then you put them on the top and you try to, not knock the tower over. And I think sometimes faith is a little like that, where we pull out these beliefs and we do an audit on them. We ask questions. How have other people thought of this? Is this something that I still want to believe? And sometimes we do hold on to the belief, but we do it a little bit differently. Like, I still believe this, but it's kind of different. And then other times, like, no, I actually can't believe this anymore. I literally can't believe it anymore. And so I was going through a number of different of my beliefs that I had held and auditing them, and some of them keeping, but some of them letting go. And the year was about 2009, 2010. And to this day, I can't remember the catalyst for why I finally went to revisit that moment in 2007 in the church lobby where I noticed the lack of alignment between my head and my heart. I don't know why, but something within me knew that I had to address that I had to, for the sense of theological integrity, which is so important to me, this concept of integrity. And I don't necessarily mean being an upright person when no one looks. That's a fine definition of integrity. I mean integrated. I mean being aligned. Because when you go back to that story where I'm lying on the bed weeping, what did I tell you? I told you it's because I was out of alignment. I was a fraud. I was telling people that I believed something and had a relationship with someone that I really didn't. I was out of alignment. And then the moment in the church lobby, I was out of alignment. My head and my heart were on different pages with regards to what does it mean to think about the Bible and homosexuality. And so sometime in 2009, 2010, I'm like, I need to figure that out. I've been auditing all these other beliefs. It's time that I actually look into the text that are often known as the clobber passages. And the clobber passages, I don't know where this term ultimately came from, but it got given to the 6 or so verses in the Bible that historically have been misused to justify discrimination against those who identify LGBTQ. And I used all of the tools of the trade, all of the ways that I was trained to exegete passages, to look into the languages, to study the cultural context, to put them in their biblical context, both within the books themselves and the larger narrative of Scripture. And I gave myself permission to just look at this topic honestly. And I didn't know, by the way, speaking of head and heart being out of alignment, I didn't know how it would end. There was no guarantee for me. I didn't know if I was going to go into this and it was going to be one of those where, you know what, I do land on the traditional side, so heart, I know it sucks, but you got to figure out how to get in line with it. Or, as obviously it turned out, I realized we've gotten this wrong. And by we, I mean the church. The church has gotten this wrong. And can I just say, like, it's fine to admit that. Not fine because obviously it's done a lot of harm, but I just mean many people over the years have said to me, Colby, really, you're gonna say that 2,000 years this has been the church's teaching, and we've just been wrong the whole time? Yeah. Guess what? We've been wrong before. We've been wrong before. For 1,500 years, the church was on the side of teaching that the earth was the center of the universe. We even had Bible verses to back it up. Did you know that? The earth is fixed and doesn't move. And then Galileo comes along and with math and telescopes dares suggest, hey, I actually think the earth is not the center of the universe. And the church said, thank you, Galileo. No, obviously they did not. But we've been wrong before. We were wrong. So much of the American church believed that it was completely fine to own other human beings as property. And we even had Bible verses to back that up. And we were wrong. We were wrong on defending slavery. The church has been wrong as it relates to viewing and treating women as secondary to men, as being a slightly lesser gender. We've been wrong before. So yeah, we've been wrong on this. So it's okay to just come out and name it, church. And so that was what happened. I did this study. I read all these passages. I came to the conclusion we've gotten this wrong. But keep in mind, at this time, I'm working in an evangelical church in a context and in a city where it was not safe for me to talk about it. I didn't have any colleagues I could talk about this with. I didn't have any family members I could talk about this with. And so even though I had found alignment between my head and my heart, and even though I had come to the conclusion we've gotten this wrong, I just kept it to myself. And I remember being really uncomfortable with that at first. Because now I'm back out of alignment again. I aligned the head and the heart, but now my internal convictions are not in alignment with my external reality. And I talk about this in the book, but for a season there, I was soothed by the story of Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman was the servant of a ruler in a foreign country, and he gets sick, and he hears about this prophet in Israel, Elisha, who's got these healing powers. So Naaman goes and meets with Elisha and gets healed of his disease, and in that process comes to accept, comes to name, comes to believe that Israel's God is the best God. The best God. Because in that day, like, everybody were polytheists. In that day, everyone had their own God, including, by the way, ancient Israel. Ancient Israel was polytheistic just like everybody else. They just thought Yahweh was the best God. This is why the 10 Commandments are, thou shalt have no other gods before me, presuming that there are other gods. And over time, the polytheistic Israelites became monotheistic and so on. But anyway, so Naaman gets healed and comes to confess and believe that Yahweh is the Most High God. And before he leaves to go back home, he talks to Elisha and he says, hey, I'm a little nervous for that moment when I get back to my master, who I have to serve, and we go into the temple and we have to do temple stuff to my old God. I'm a little nervous for that. What do I do? Because I believe that Yahweh is the Most High God. And Elisha says, in order to be a man of good character and good, in order for God to be happy with you, you need to go back and you need to tell your boss that you no longer believe in your old God, that Yahweh is the Most High God, and he'll probably kill you, but that's how you be good. No, this is not what Elisha says. This is not what Elisha says. Elisha says to Naaman, go in peace. And when you look at what he's saying, he's giving him permission essentially to go back to his hometown and keep his newfound conviction in Yahweh private. Because his life was on the line. And Elisha knew that. And Yahweh knows that. Like, Yahweh's like, I don't need you to go kill yourself. Like, this is great. You're loving me now. Love it. It's fantastic. And so I remember at that time in my life in Arizona when I had this new conviction and I read this story about Naaman, I felt this divine permission slip. Even if it was just for a season in my life, I felt this divine permission slip to, okay, I can for now keep these things in here, knowing that it just isn't a safe environment yet for me to talk about these things out loud. And that was great for a while, but I do tend to, and I call it the Naaman effect. I do tend to think the Naaman effect is temporary. It's short-lived. Like we are not designed to live out of alignment for that long. Like it's just not a tenable position. So fast forward about another year or so, and it was 2011, September, and President Obama signed the repeal for Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I remember that day learning about that, just being stoked. Like, fine, because I just viewed it as such a discriminatory law, and I was so happy that it was repealed. And so I did the smartest thing one could do, and I went to Facebook and posted on Facebook a link to an article announcing the repeal, and I put 6 words, I'm glad this day finally came. And I hit post, and I went to bed. And I woke up the next morning to just a litany of comments from people in my church just freaking out. Is our church now pro-homosexual? Why are our pastors advocating for the gay agenda? Which, by the way, I've been an ally for like over a dozen years now, and I have yet to get my copy of the gay agenda. So if anybody knows where I can get a copy, I feel like I've earned it at some point, but why are we advocating the gay agenda? And I get to the office that day, and my boss says, Colby, you got to take it down. You got to take that post down. My phone's been blowing up all night. People are freaking out. And I didn't want to lose my job or cause any more of a ruckus, so I took the post down. I thought that was the end of it. Until 2 days later when I was told that an emergency board meeting was planned for Friday. And of all the words you want to hear before a board meeting, if the best one is canceled, the worst one is emergency. The worst emergency board meeting. Like, that's not good. So going into that board meeting, I knew that I would be asked about my theology on sexuality. And I knew my time to live within the Naaman effect had run its course. And so the night before, I typed out a letter, because I knew that when I was in that room with the guys, if I was just left to speak off the cuff, that I might chicken out or that I might not say what I want to say. So I typed out a letter. It ended up being 10 pages long, way too long. But by now, you've been with me long enough to be like, actually, that kind of checks out. You're a little verbose. My life motto is, why use 10 words when 50 will do, you know? And so I write this letter, and the next morning I go to the board meeting, and sure enough, right out the gate, Colby, we need to know your position on same-sex marriage, and we need to know what you think about homosexuality. And I said, well, I remember starting out with, I don't remember why I did this. I thought it was really important in the moment, but I'm like, is this question that important to every single one of you? I need to ask. And I went around the room and I said, is it that important to you? Yes. Is it that important to you? Yes. And all 8 men, I don't need to tell you they were men. I told you it was an evangelical church. That's redundant. So shots fired all over the place. I don't know if you're an evangelical here tonight, but I love you. You're my people. So I get to pick on my people. And all 8 men, is it that important to you? Yes, 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 yes. I'm like, okay. So I pulled out my backpack and passed out I got printed off a 10-page copy for all of the men. I killed a small bush in this effort, is what I'm saying. And everyone got a copy of this letter, and I read through it, in which I outlined a bit of my research and why I think we've gotten this topic wrong and why I'd be in favor of same-sex marriage. And I ended it with something like, but hey, I hope I can still work here. Which is interesting now, by the way, thinking back, because I think you know either where the story is going because you can intuit it or you read the book. But looking back now, what a gift that I did not keep my job. You know what I mean? Like, not only was getting fired, because that's what happened, I'm jumping ahead here, but not only was getting fired one of the best things that ever happened to me, but I needed to be in a place where I could be fully aligned and not try to dance the, oh, I got these ideas, but I'll keep them to myself and I'll try and toe the line. So the meeting ends and they said, take Sunday off, we'll fill your spot for you, and then come in next week and we'll let you know our decision. So I didn't go to church that Sunday, which ostensibly meant I never got to see my church again. Like that was it, because I come into the office on Tuesday and they hand me a letter of termination effective immediately. And that meant that, my wife and our 3.5 kids at the time had to sell our home and move back to Oregon to be with our family. And yet I was, once again, in alignment. So it was a terrible, terrible, terrible feeling to get fired for just an idea in my head. And yet it led to this kind of liberation, this kind of alignment that is truly, you can't put a price on it. And over the next few months, as word began to trickle out why I got fired, because the church wasn't forthcoming about why they fired me. This probably doesn't surprise you, but the letter to the congregation was, over issues central to the gospel, we've decided to part ways. It's like, really? That's what we're saying? But as word kind of began to trickle out, people would question and ask questions. Again, back on Facebook. I don't know how I wound up on there so often. And so I was trying to respond to people one-off on questions about, well, what about Sodom and Gomorrah? And that got tiring and tiresome, and really nothing good ever happens on Facebook interactions. So then I went to my blog. Do you remember blogs? They used to exist back in the day, and I started to put some of my research in blog form. And then I got hired at a church in San Diego. So we moved to San Diego, and while I was there, I took my material, and that was where I came up with the idea of Unclobber and started to put it together in this teaching series over a course of Wednesdays. Then that got crystallized into a Saturday lecture, and then I got in touch with a publisher back in 2015, and they wanted to put this in book form. And so that's how Unclobber came to be. It's half of the book is my story, which I've shared a bit with you tonight, and the other half of the book, and they do alternate chapters, the other half of the book is the engaging with these clobber passages, showing that when you put them in their context, and we're not going to go through them tonight, we don't even need to, most of you are already there, but what I discovered is when you put these texts in their context, they're biblical, they're cultural, they're historical context. What you discover is that we've gotten it wrong, like I said, but oftentimes we have them like exactly oppositely wrong. This is what is so kind of tragically beautiful to me. Like when you look at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and you understand that it's a story about a warning against being inhospitable and a warning against treating the outsiders as outsiders, and yet it's been used as a passage to create outsiders and treat people like the other. Or you look at Romans and this passage that was originally intended to unify this church that had been fractured along ethnic lines. Like the original intent of Paul in this part of the letter was to bring people together, and it has subsequently been used to cause further division. Like these are the things that, for me, are mind-blowing when you look at that. So Unclobber came out in 2016, and in 2014, we started a church in San Diego. Some of you were asking about it earlier. The church was called Sojourn Grace Collective, and we ran it for almost 9 years. We did ultimately close it in October of 2022 because the pandemic. We were virtual for 2 years, and it was really great. We had a great virtual ministry. But then when the board felt really strong about us getting back into meeting in person again, and when we tried it, it was pretty evident that whatever form of our church existed prior to the pandemic didn't exist anymore, and it would have felt like starting over. And after doing full-time pastoral work for 20 years, I just didn't quite have it in me to start over yet again. And so we lovingly just let it end. Which, can I just say, we live in a culture that sees the endings of things as failures, and I just think that is so wrong-headed. First of all, everything ends. Nothing lasts forever. So are we going to say that everything is a failure? Well, no, that would be silly too. And second of all, that church didn't fail, man. It didn't fail. That was some of the most fruitful ministry that I've ever seen, the number of lives that were touched and transformed. So did that, closed that down in October of 2022. And right about that time, my life fell apart in a couple ways. Fell apart's the wrong. I just talked about how it wasn't a failure. Obviously, I'm showing emotionally how I feel about it still. But right before we closed the church, my wife of 19 years also said that our marriage needed to end. So within the span of the same month or two, my 20-year vocation as a pastor and my 19-year identity as a husband and full-time father, really, all of that ended at the same time. Don't recommend if you can avoid it. If you can avoid that, that's a lot to lose in one time. And yet I'm still here. Isn't that remarkable? I mean, like, isn't that remarkable? Somehow I'm still here. And it's not because of me. I'm nothing special. Karis has been calling me rock star for the last 2 days, and each time I'm like, you know me now. You know there's nothing special about me. I am as basic as they come. And so for me, it's this incredible testament to grace, this incredible testament to the pattern of resurrection. I mean, we know this is how everything goes. Everything has to die, and then it's born again. So for the last, going on 2 years, almost 2 years now, what I'm doing here tonight is what I've been trying to do for the last 2 years. No, I'm not currently pastoring a church full-time, but yes, I am pastoring a lot of people all over the country as much as I can. Digitally, online some, but mostly through traveling and meeting you in person and being with you and hearing your stories and meeting your leaders and building this incredible optimism for the future. I was talking with a journalist after the second service today. This wasn't her question, but I heard it as, what the heck's up with the evangelicals? Like, what's going on? And I said, yes, listen, I get it. Not great time for the evangelicals right now, for all sorts of reasons. But I am still super optimistic. Maybe not evangelicalism, that can go by the wayside and it's fine. But for the church, I'm incredibly optimistic because I have seen, just since I've been doing this work, and some of you in this room have been doing this work a whole lot longer than I have, just since I've been doing this work in the last 13 years, the number of churches that have changed on this particular topic, that have become affirming, I mean, hello, like look around, the number of churches that have started and been planted and launched as inclusive, affirming churches, that has just grown and grown and grown and grown. So I'm incredibly optimistic for the future. That train has left the station, thank God, and it's not slowing down. Now, how does that, you might say, Colby, but put that in context with what we're seeing right now around the country, which is a lot of attempts to undo legislation, to pull back rights that have been hard fought. So much energy into anti-trans and all of that. So here's my thought on that. Yes, that is real and that's happening. Actually, before I share my main thought, quick secondary thought is this. If you don't know, then may tonight be your introduction to the phenomena that bad is stronger than good. Are you familiar with this? Bad is stronger than good, which is to say, it takes something like, I don't remember the number, but it takes like 20 seconds for you to reflect on a good piece of information for it to stick, whereas it takes like half a second for you to hear a bad piece of information and it sticks. Bad is stronger than good. This is why if it bleeds, it leads. This is why the sensationalism of news is they'll always tell you the worst possible thing, because that's what we are attracted to. That we don't like that we are. We might wish that we weren't that way, but bad is stronger than good. And so just be mindful, be wary whenever you read articles that talk about how awful things are, whether it's in the church or others. Yes, sometimes that's true, but I do think sometimes we just aren't told the full story. We just aren't told the full story. But the thing that I wanted to say about part of what I think is happening right now is there's a term that comes from the world of sociology called extinction burst. An extinction burst is a way to describe the phenomena where right before something goes extinct, you see this spike in activity. And then it disappears. And I think what's happening right now in the church at large, especially within evangelicalism, is it's an extinction burst moment. This sort of small-minded, bigoted, myopic perspective that sees the world in a very contained and confined and fear-filled way is not long for this world. But we're seeing right now kind of the last-ditch efforts of it clinging to power, clinging to the last piece that it has. So I'm incredibly hopeful and optimistic. And the fact that I've been traveling the country now for almost 2 years, meeting folks like you, continues to fuel my hope. In addition to, by the way, the fact that this work is not yet done. I just got my annual royalty statement for Unclobber the other day. Every year, publisher sends statement for how many books were sold, and Unclobber has done well, but also like we're not talking. I'm not making a living off of Unclobber by any stretch of the imagination. I can basically buy a new mattress every year with my sales from Unclobber. But the thing I want to tell you is, this last year, Unclobber sold more copies than any other year before it. And it's been out for 8 years. And that's almost been true every year. It's almost sold more than the year before it, which is a bit surprising to me. Because I'll be honest with you, my goal with this book is to finally get the call from the publisher, hey, Colby, we're not going to publish anymore because nobody's buying it because it's not needed anymore. You know what I mean? I can't wait for that day. So this work is not over. It's not over. But man, what a gift it is to do it. And I'm incredibly hopeful and optimistic. So that's a word about God, divine preference for diversity. There's a word about me, so you know a bit about who I am. And let me tell you this real quick. Why do I do this work? Why do I, as a straight, white, cisgendered male, why do I do this work? Here's how I've come to answer that question, because I get asked that question frequently. And even today I was asked if I started to study the Clobber passages because I had gay family members or friends, and the truth is I didn't. I didn't really know any gay people that I knew of, or had any gay friends until after I'd gotten fired from that church in Arizona. So why do I do this work? Here's how I've come to answer that question. There's a story in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus and his friends are walking outside of Jericho. And there's a blind man on the side of the road who hears it's Jesus or knows it's Jesus or whatever. Jesus is crossing by. And so the man yells out, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus doesn't hear him, but his disciples do. And they say, "Shh, like hush, man, keep it down. Like we've got really important places to go. We don't have time for you." Which just causes the man to yell louder, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." And that catches Jesus' ear. Now, I'd like to think in that moment, Jesus had a couple options available to him. He could have just stopped walking, turned around, and yelled back, "Yeah, what do you want? What can I do for you?" He didn't do that. He could have gone over to the man, like, "Oh, yeah, how can I help you?" He didn't do that. He could have made one of those famous Jesus spitballs, you know, where he like spits down makes a little bit of mud and kind of like flings it across the way and hits the guy and cures his. He didn't do that. What did he do? Do you remember this story? He turns to his disciples and he says, "Go get him and bring him to me." And years ago, I remember reading that story and being hit with this. Oh, Jesus turned to the guys who just moments ago were the ones restricting access to this man. And they said, "You who built this wall to keep this guy out, it's up to you to go tear it down. You got to fix this. You caused it. You broke it. You fix it." So why do I do this work? Because I, both as an evangelical pastor for a number of years, were part of the system, but even more to the point, because I represent, I am the identity of primarily the kinds of people that have historically been the ones who have kept queer people in the margins and told them, no, you don't get to have the same access we do. Like that's been me. That's been my people. And so I do this work in part because I gotta undo it. I helped build it, and I gotta undo it. So my life's mission now is, as best I can, be a conduit of love. A conduit of love. This is before I go up to any talk, before I start any event, I just pray, God, make me a conduit of love. That's all, just a vessel to pour love out. That's all I can do. It's a word about God, it's a word about me, not a word about you. And the word about you and the word about we will go a little bit quicker here, and we'll have some time for questions here in a minute. But a word about you. I want to say this. This is specifically to anyone in the room who identifies lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. And you may not need me to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. You are not broken. You are not broken. You're not broken. And if you remember the story from the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve, they eat the forbidden fruit, and for the first time they see themselves and they see each other in this exposed, vulnerable state. And so they sew these clothes for themselves to cover up. Do you remember how God walks through the garden and looks for them and says, "Where are you?" And they were hiding, and they come out from hiding, and God sees them all clothed. Do you remember what God says to them? "Who told you that you were naked? Who told you that you had to cover up? Who told you that there was anything wrong with you?" So in a similar way, I stand here and I say, "Who told you that? I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve it. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. I'm so sorry." Part of the reason why talk therapy works, and I should know, I've put a lot of hours on the couch. Don't laugh that hard. No, I'm just kidding. Part of the reason why talk therapy works is because when you're sitting down with your therapist and you talk about some of your past trauma and your past pain and your past suffering, you're essentially reactivating your central nervous system. You're bringing back online what it felt like when those moments happened to you. And ideally, the therapist reflects back to you safety, non-judgment, compassion, love, really. And what's so incredible about the brain is the brain has the capacity to rewire its neural pathways, and it can actually make new connections. And so in that moment, your body is activated back into its traumatic state of fight, flight. And instead of getting threat, instead of getting shame, instead of getting judgment, which is what happened back when we had these things frozen in us, we get love, kindness, compassion. And what that does is that creates new pathways in our brain. It connects these memories with new emotional experiences. And this is how the healing begins to happen. I tell you that because another question that I often get is, why, as a straight man, should anyone listen to me or read my book? And on one hand, I totally understand that. I totally understand that guys like me have taken up a ton of space for a really long time. And sometimes the right move is to just kind of shut up and sit down and get out of the way. And there are times in my life where I absolutely do that. And I also think, going back to what I said about guys like me were the ones that sort of built that wall, the people in this room that know what it's like to be on the outside, to be told that you are broken, to be told that there's something wrong with you, I can almost guarantee you that behind that criticism, there was a man, probably a white man. And even if it was a woman or a mother figure, where do you think that person got that idea from? What I'm saying is, you trace it back far enough, and it's guys like me that have given these messages. And so I think in a similar way to how the reason why therapy works is the same reason why this church works for healing. Because when people show up, maybe you're here tonight, or maybe you've come on a Sunday morning and you've experienced this, and you hear, whether it's talk about the clobber passages, or you hear even just hymns sometime can trigger people's central nervous system to go back to that time in their life when they were full of fear and shame, and yet they receive instead the community like this of love and kindness and compassion. This is how the healing works. And so me standing here and saying to those in the room who identify queer in some way that you are not broken, that you are loved just as you are, I think there's something in that that has a way of helping to connect a new emotional response to that part of your brain. Now, maybe you're here tonight and you are an ally in some way. And what I want to say to you is, I'm so freaking proud of you. Not like you get all the cookies and you get all the accolades and you get all the awards. That's not the point. But the point is I know that many of you in this room have also paid a cost to find the kind of alignment that I've been talking about. And you might still be paying that cost. There might be friends and family in your life that you're not really on great terms with anymore, because something about this issue or enough things like this have just caused that rupturing. Some of you vocationally have been, similar to myself, on the receiving end of rejection as a result of this. So I want to say I'm really proud of you. Keep going. We need you. And keep in mind that the cost that you and I have paid, again, I'm not minimum, it's real. The cost that we have paid, that gives us just an empathetic, small window into the cost that many of our queer siblings have paid. That's a bit of a touch point we can have. It's not the same, but it's also not the same. And so it gives us a little bit, if even I have experienced a kind of othering from people, I can scale that up now. Imagine that 3x, 6x, 10x You can begin to scale that up, and that'll ground you in this kind of empathy of, oh, yeah. I literally can't even imagine what that would be, because it is so much more than I have experienced. And I want to say, keep going, keep showing up. Brene Brown talks about having a soft front and a strong spine, I think is the way she describes it. So we stay soft in the front, we're open, we're vulnerable, but we have a strong back, like we don't give up easily. We need you. The queer people in this room, the queer people in this community need you. Churches like this have to keep existing and growing and thriving and being a part of turning the tide of the whole entire world, truly. So keep going. Okay, I'll end with this. A word about God, a word about me, a word about you, and then finally a word about us. I got two stories. The first happened on January 24th, 1975. After a 5-hour grueling drive through the hills of Western Germany, legendary jazz pianist Keith Jarrett finally reached his destination, the Cologne Opera House. That night, he was scheduled to play for a sold-out crowd of rabid jazz enthusiasts. And so Keith Jarrett shows up, aching from the long drive, already struggling with a bad back, and he shows up and he gets to the piano, which he had arranged ahead of time to have a Bosendorfer 275, like concert grand piano set up for him. And he sits down and realizes this is like a rehearsal piano whose low keys and high keys didn't work, were out of tune, and the sustain pedal didn't work. He's like, I can't play. Because he was known to be a perfectionist, Keith Jarrett. He said, I can't play on this. I'm not going to play on this. I'm not doing the show. And he starts to leave. The room's packed out, 1,400 people. And he starts to leave. I'm not going to do the show. There was a 17-year-old promoter named Vera Brands. Vera was the one who put the whole event together, sold out the opera house, invited Keith Jarrett, put the whole thing together. And she pleads with Jarrett, please stay. Please, I know, I'm sorry the piano is broken. Please, will you please not give up? Will you please stay and play for us? And somehow she manages to convince Jarrett to stay and to play. And ECM Records had planned to record the concert that night, and so they did. They recorded the concert, probably thinking it'd be a throwaway. Like, this isn't going to be good, this cruddy old piano. But Keith Jarrett, body bent over and broken, busted instrument, he improvised his brains out for about 2 hours. And they captured the whole performance. In fact, if you listen closely to the performance, which I encourage you to do, you can hear at times Jarrett like groaning, audibly groaning into the mix. And you can hear the piano creaking under the weight of strain. And ECM Records released the record later that year called the Köln Concert, K-O-L-N. And it went on to sell more than 4 million copies, and it's still the best-selling jazz pianist album of all time, that concert. I tell you that story because I think in some ways, you and I think sometimes Christians, people who maybe grew up in the church, maybe they're even still in the church in some way. I think many of the people in this room at times feel a little bit like Jarrett, Keith Jarrett. Tired. A little broken and busted. Really not wanting to show up this time. I think that out-of-tune piano maybe is a kind of a great picture for Christianity. It's kind of a broken instrument in many ways. There are parts of it that don't sound real nice. It's kind of a broken tool. And I think the Köln concert, this majestic, beautiful piece of art that emerged out of tired, broken people playing with busted, imperfect instruments is a testament to the magic that still can and still does happen when we just show up and keep playing. So in my own small way, I'm kind of like your Vera Brands tonight, like cheering you on, like keep going, keep going. And I'll give you one last story, and then we'll turn over to questions. A father had 2 sons. And one day the younger son came to the father and said, "Dad, I'd like my share of the inheritance." Which at that point essentially was the son saying to his dad, I wish you were dead already, because I would like to have my inheritance, my money. And the dad, who seemed to always have this open-hearted, generous posture, gave his younger son his half of the inheritance. And so the son left, went off, and soon ran out. Spent his money maybe in unwise ways, one might say, short-sighted ways. Got to a point where he was totally out of money. And all he could do was find a job working for someone by feeding the pigs, which for a young Jewish boy, by the way, did I say this was a Jewish family? For a young Jewish boy, this would have been the worst of the worst, the lowest of the lowest. And in that moment, the young son thinks, even if I were just a servant at my dad's house, I'd be better off than this. And so he comes up with this plan. I'm going to return home, and I'm going to apologize to my dad. I'm going to tell him how wrong I was. I'm going to beg him to let me back in. Maybe you've heard this story before. And so the son starts to come home, and the dad actually sees his son from a long way off, almost as though he's been watching and waiting. And when he sees his son, he begins to run, which is very unusual for a man of his age and his stature. Begins to run. And he gets to his son, and he throws his arms around his son, and he begins holding him tight and kissing him. And the son starts to go into the speech that he had prepared. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I have wronged you." And the dad really doesn't even hear. Doesn't even matter. Puts a robe on him, puts a ring on his hand. He says, "We're going to throw a party. You're back. You're home." The son never even gets to the whole apology that he had planned. So the party is going, all the neighbors are invited, everybody's celebrating. The son who was lost has now returned home. But there was one person who wasn't at the party, and this was the older brother, for the man had 2 sons. And the older brother is sulking by himself off in the corner. His dad comes and finds him, and, "Hey, bud, where are you? We're having a party. Your brother's back." And the older brother says, "Dad, I don't get it. I've done everything right. I've done what I'm supposed to do. I wasn't like my stinking little brother who took all the money and left and wasted it all. I did everything right. And you don't even give me and my friends a goat for a barbecue. And yet now you've killed the best cow for this party for a worthless brother of mine." And the dad, I often wonder what the dad was thinking in that moment. Was it possible the dad felt some sadness that he had failed his oldest son? I'm not exactly sure, but the dad responds with this sort of beautiful articulation where he says, "Son, everything I have has always been yours." As if to say, you didn't even ever have to ask, like, me goat es su goat. I tell you that story because I think it illustrates something pretty fundamental about us. Both of these sons missed a key part of what it meant to be loved by their father. The younger son thought he didn't deserve to be loved by his father. The older son thought he did deserve. But here's the thing, is when it comes to the love of God, deserve has nothing to do with it. Deserve has nothing to do with it. You are loved by God just because you are. The good news is you can't mess that up. You can't earn it. You never did, you never will, and you can't lose it. Just because you are loved by God. And so I end by saying to you the words that I believe are true about all of us. The words that I believe are true about all of us come from the opening of the Gospels, where Jesus, to begin his public ministry, the thing that catapulted him from the quiet, private life that he lived for 30 years or so, that then launched him into this new trajectory. The pivot moment was his baptism. And when he came up out of the waters, witnesses said it was like the heavens opened up. I don't know how to describe it. It's similar to the tongues of fire. It's like, look, language at some point is going to fail us. I don't know. It's like, and a dove maybe came from the heavens. I don't know. But we heard this voice. And the voice says, "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased." And I believe that's the same word that is spoken to all of us. That you are my child, and in you I am well pleased. That you are my child, and in you I am well pleased. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you. It's so good to be here. I love you all.
So the beautiful thing, and I have more to say, but I want to listen to what folks want to ask first before we close out. We have almost 200 people viewing us online right now. And so as we ask questions, Pastor Earl is going to pass a microphone because we have people who are watching who would like to hear the question. So if you have a question for Pastor Colby, please just raise your hand and Pastor Earl will bring you the mic and answer any questions. Thanks, Colby.
Yeah. Where are the cameras? I didn't even know we were... That's creepy. They're all over. Okay. Kind of glad I didn't know that. Like, man, am I sweating through my shirt? I don't know. Anyways, do we have any questions? These could be questions. Maybe you read on Clobber and you came with some questions. Maybe anything I said tonight, if it sparked something in you that you wanted to reflect on or ask about or engage with. And then this is where I say, will someone please give us the gift of going second? Which means someone volunteered to go first, so everyone else gets the gift of going second. So, yeah, thank you, Catherine. Or wait, we got the microphone, remember, for the people. Yeah.
Okay. So I've been doing this work for a little while, and I'm not actively doing it now. And I'm wondering what you see as the landscape denominationally. So I was defrocked in '94 and started a gay ministry. But, different Methodists, I know where Methodists are, but where do you see lights and where are denominationals in broad brushstrokes? And particularly in light of the political craziness that we're in.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, good question. Okay, so really all that I'm qualified to speak on or even have any insights is on the evangelical denomination, not that it's a denomination. And similar to what I said earlier, I am while I'm on one hand disgusted by the group of individuals that taught me what it means to be a Christian, the things that they sort of instilled in me of like what it means to be a person of God and a person of character and a person of integrity, seem to now be simultaneously the same people for whom that doesn't even matter. Like that incongruity is really troubling to me, and it's troubling to a lot of people. So my point is, there has been a mass exodus out of evangelical world over the last 8 years. And you can do the math on what happened 8 years ago. Large exodus out of the evangelical world. Many people, many post or ex, some people identify themselves as ex-evangelical. I prefer the term post-evangelical just because I prefer to not be identified by what I'm against, but rather just acknowledging, oh, that evangelical, that was a part of my life. That's just not where I am anymore. In the spiral dynamics, you would talk about transcend and include. So I've transcended the evangelical world, but I bring with it parts of it. It's still part of me. So a lot of evangelicals have left that world and found themselves in mainline denominations, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Episcopal. A lot have just left church altogether. So I'm hopeful for the evangelical church, like I mentioned earlier. Karis, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the state of the denomination as it relates to your denomination?
Sure. And I think, just coming from the Synod Assembly yesterday,
He's walking behind you like a bridal train or something. That's great.
That's Pastor Earl. I think it geographically depends where we are. For example, there were some pastors visiting yesterday in Westminster, Maryland, and they came from different parts of the country, but stay in our synod because it's a very welcoming synod for our people, queers. And a couple of them came up to me and said, how did you get this church? Right? How did I get Community Lutheran? I said, because Community Lutheran just didn't become Community Lutheran. Community Lutheran did the work. And wherever you are, you need to do the work, right? So it depends geographically in the ELCA. I'm hopeful in my own denomination. I think, as a matter of fact, the fastest growing churches, and you touched on it, right now, are the churches that are affirming.
I know that, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say that again, the churches that are?
The churches that are growing the fastest are affirming congregations. Inclusive, right?
Yeah. Good.
And like you, I only speak for the ELCA.
Yeah.
And then a PS, I just moved from the West Coast to the East Coast. A bit of a shock. And what I see, I live in Virginia Beach, which is a more conservative area, but just these gigantic, non-denominational, scary as hell churches that are homophobic completely and radically sexist and scares the bejeepers out of me. I mean, in 2 blocks from my house, there's 2 gigantic ones. And I know that all denominations have split over ordination of gays and lesbians. I mean, I know that, we all know that. But it, I'm just trying to think about historically when we look at this time in history, and this issue has been the center of many churches for 30 years, what's happening? And so I see way difference between the West and the East.
Yeah, geography is interesting. As I've been traveling the last year and a half, one thing that I've noticed that has surprised me, and this isn't true everywhere, but I've noticed that it seems to be easier to build and grow a kind of progressive church. And in that context, it was more like post-evangelical, progressive Christian church. It seemed to be easier to do that in the South and in more conservative areas than on the coast and more liberal areas. And my working theory is when the culture already has church embedded into it, it's easier to turn church-cultured people into progressive Christians than it is to turn progressive people into church-going people. So anyway, that's my thought. So maybe my next plant is going to be in Alabama or something.
And just a word for those who are online, if you will add your question to the comments, we will make sure that we will try to get that through.
I got a question. My name's Gary. I'm here with Catherine. And all my life, I don't think I'm homosexual, but I've always felt like a piece of shit. You know, somewhere in my history, I grew up in the Baptist church just like you did. I ended up in an orphanage home, and all I ever heard was, "You're not worth it, you're not worth it, you're not worth it." And I've been doing a lot of therapy and a lot of work around that. I'm pretty much recovered from Baptist. I believe very heavily in spirituality and that kind of thing. And when Catherine said she's not practicing this anymore, and you were referring to keep doing what you're doing, I'm sitting right here, okay? So she is doing this, and
Yeah.
I'm doing it, and people see what I'm doing, and my kids were not taught the shit that I was taught. Excuse me, God, for the... My kids were not taught to hate homosexuals and to hate blacks and to hate this and that. And for a white Christian American to sit here and say, I feel like a piece of shit, I feel pretty guilty about that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I haven't gone through anything like what my girlfriend has gone through, what you've gone through. And I don't know why I'm saying all this, but I really appreciate everything I've heard today. It's just unbelievable. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know why you're saying it either, but I have a guess. Can I share with you? It's possible that inside of you is the 8-year-old version of you that first began to internalize and hear these messages. There's something wrong with you, that you are a sinner, that you're fallen, that you are so despicable to God as a sinner that you are going to spend eternity in hell, right? Those messages that have been given to children at such a young age, brother, you got those at the same time in your life when you started learning basic facts about the world. 2 + 2 = 4. Here's how photosynthesis works. Here's how to conjugate a verb. Some of us never figured that one out. Don't worry about it. It's hard. At the same time you were getting all of that information in your brain, the sweet young version of you is also getting this other information. Shame, condemnation, something wrong with you. Our brains don't have 2 different buckets at that age to be like, hold on to these. They're scientific facts. You can trust those. These ones hold loosely because we may need to change them someday. No, they embedded into your body in the same exact way. It is no surprise to me, whether it's you or anyone in this room, that you still carry with you those messages, even though you may cognitively, you stopped believing that decades ago. Your body hasn't. It's still in there. The body keeps the score, and it remembers. So I don't know why you said that either, but here's my guess. It's because deep inside there's the part of you that is still asking that question. And I think what that part of you needs to hear is a room full of people responding back to you with love and compassion that says, I'm sorry that you were told that. I was not okay. You are beautiful, and you are loved, and you are good. And I'm really freaking proud of you. Thank you. Who else? Yeah, in the back there.
Yes, could you, I read your book, but when it was going through there's 6 clobber passages.
Yeah.
I got to maybe number 3 or 4, but I couldn't find the other 2. So could you just cite the 6?
Yeah, in
clobber
chronological
passages?
order, Genesis 19 is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's the first one. The next 2 come in Leviticus chapter 18 and chapter 20 or 22. I don't know. They're like the same thing. Leviticus 18 and then Leviticus 20, I think. That's the 3 Old Testament passages. And then in the New Testament, there's 3 passages. The first is Romans 1, 26 and 27. And then passages 5 and 6. I lump them together because they're so similar. 1 Corinthians 6, 9. And yeah, I say 1 Corinthians, okay? My Bible doesn't have the little ST on it. Does yours? No. So it's 1 Corinthians, not first. Anyway, 1 Corinthians 6. Now, why did I say that? Nobody was mad at me. 1 Corinthians 6, now I got defensive for no reason. See, it's still in me. 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and then 1 Timothy 1, 9, and 10 is the 6th one. And then a long time ago, people used to throw a verse in Jude in there. Like Jude has something about strange flesh, but that's one of those that was such a bad translation and so easily disregardable because it was a callback to Sodom and Gomorrah that nobody actually takes Jude seriously anymore as like a clobber passage. So you can ignore that. Next, yeah.
From online, someone asked, how do you respond, or how can we respond to the very common kind of statement, love the sinner, hate the sin?
That's a great question. I love this question.
I never jump in, but I love it. Oh, sorry. I got to jump in. I
Please.
love it.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, the number one question I'm asked or told in 36 years of ministry, when I go see someone, hate the sin, Pastor, but I love you.
How does that make you feel?
I am so less than to know.
Yeah.
Right? I'm
yeah.
less than. But I love them. And I use it as an educational moment. But that is the number one thing that is told to me when I'm with people. So now I embrace it. I'm like, yes, isn't it awesome?
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I'll add to that. One of the things I like to, thank you for that, Pastor Karos. One of the ways I like to respond to that question is I begin first by affirming the instinct, affirming the intent behind that statement. Here's what I mean by that. It actually makes a lot of sense to me that we would have a posture that could be summarized by hate the sin. Now, I don't love that verbiage for a number of reasons, but the idea behind that is there are things that happen in the world. There are ways that we cause suffering to others and bring suffering to ourselves that can be categorized as sin, that the part of us that longs for justice to be done actually looks at that and does have a posture of, I don't want that to exist. That injustice, that pain, that suffering, that wrongdoing, I actually do have a posture towards that of, again, I don't love the word hate for a number of reasons, but it kind of sums it up. And right now, you can probably think of a few examples of things that happen in the world, ways that people hurt others, bring about suffering and destruction, and we want there to be energy towards that of don't exist. I don't want that action to exist anymore in the world. And then I couple that with, what's the first part of that? Love the sinner. What are we saying there? The intent there is that we are attempting to separate a person's identity from their behavior. We're attempting to say, what I said earlier, which is true about everybody in this room, is also true about everybody outside of this room. Everyone else is also a loved child of God. In fact, at our church, Sojourn Grace, our benediction every single Sunday, this is how we closed our service every Sunday for 9 years. It was a call and response. The leader or anyone in the congregation would call out, be brave, and the rest of the congregation would say, because you're a child of God. And then the leader would say, be kind, and then we'd respond with, because so is everyone else. Like everyone is a loved child of God. So the impetus behind love the sinner is an attempt to try to distinguish a person's actions that we rightfully assess as being harmful and causing suffering in the world. We say, that's your actions. I'm gonna have a feeling of judgment towards that because that's unjust. But for you, your identity, I don't get to judge that. I don't. We don't get to judge people's identity. It's already been judged. And it's child of God. Like we don't get to come in and overwrite that. So I actually, in some way, I affirm that instinct behind love the sinner, hate the sin. Like, I get where that's coming from. And there are times where I actually think that's a pretty decent posture to take. There are certain politicians that I have a really hard time with their actions, but who they are as a loved child of God, I don't really have any other option but to love them. If I want to take Christianity seriously. If I don't, I can do whatever I want. But I'm trying to take Christianity seriously. I'm trying to practice it seriously. So I have to actually love the person as best as I can while simultaneously saying, but the actions I'm strongly against. So I start there because I affirm where that's coming from. I get it. But then where it gets problematic is what Karis just said. When it starts to be directed at people who themselves are a particular sexual orientation or gender identity, now we are mixing up those distinction between identity and behavior, and we're now saying you love the sinner, but we're also saying hate the sinner at the same time. And in that instance, it's not hate the sin anymore. They're actually hating the sinner, the person, right? We have now transcended we've left the world of actions and we've gone into the world of identity. So this is where love the sinner, hate the sin when it comes to queer people simply does not work. That posture just doesn't work. When people say that that's what they should do, like Kara said, no gay person that I've ever talked to has ever felt loved by someone who says, I love you, but I hate your sin. No one has ever felt loved by that. And that matters. It matters that there isn't the feeling of love. I get that love isn't always mushy-gushy good feelings, but if the percentage rate is 0 for the number of people that feel loved by that posture, I think that's worth investigating. So love the sin or hate the sin just simply does not work in this instance, even though I affirm the instinct behind it and can think of a number of examples where that actually does make sense. That's my thought. Thank you, online person. I don't know which camera to wave at. Probably not that one, because I think it's pointing back there. Okay, who else? What else? What else is coming up out there? Yeah, right here in the middle.
I'm not really sure how to frame the question. I've been listening to you, and at points have been buoyant, and at other points, as a gay man, have been angry. I appreciate your story about Naaman and Elijah, but having grown up in the Catholic Church and having tried to live a life active in a church as an authentically gay person, I was happy to hear how you rationalized your continuing engagement in a faith in which you didn't feel whole, that you felt misaligned. And I've been to a couple of these. I'm very active in a progressive Presbyterian church in Arlington, and I've been looking for years for a congregation here.
You keep looking.
I keep looking. The bit that makes me a little angry, I think, and I don't think it's a question, it's like you let yourself off the hook, and you keep using the word harm very lightly. So I appreciate the story, because I've never heard someone from the pulpit frame their rationale for continuing to remain engaged in a faith that did what it did to people like me. And more importantly, did what it did to people who were like me, who died, and for whom there was no consolation and no compassion. For years we were in the wilderness, and we were dropping dead, and no one would touch us. No one would help us. So, congregations like this use harm as a term of the past, and it's not. There was an entire community of humanity that was traumatized and devastated in the last 20 years by the position and the posture of the modern church, whether it was Lutheran or Presbyterian or Catholic. And now I see all these efforts to be reconciling, and I'm hearing lots of stories from different sources about how people are justifying or rationalizing the way they behaved or responded to the world around them 20 or 30 years ago, but were welcome now. And I'm really struggling to find authenticity in the messages of some of these congregations. I've only been here 3 times, and I'm very happy to have found all of you. And I'm not maligning you, it's just my experience has been I approach these kinds of things with caution. Because my experience has not always proved in the end that the Christians walk their talk. We lived in a world where we were beginning to feel safe, and then 8 years ago that got turned on its ear. And now when we travel, we worry where we travel. We're conscious of where we are and who we are among. So anyway, I don't know, it's not a question. I alternately have been buoyant and very angry at other moments during the last hour and a half. And I appreciate your story of Naaman. But there is a little part of me that thinks that that's almost too easy. You know, I get that people think that way, but maybe we're just letting ourselves off the hook. I don't know, you don't have to react to that. I don't know that you get many people that have, I mean, you said up and down. I've been like that sitting in my chair. My heart's been beating on my chest. So anyway, that's for what it's worth.
Can I ask you your name?
My name's Mike.
Mike. Thank you. That was real brave. And if all I can offer you is the safety of what you just shared is okay to say, that's what I give. It's okay. I'm not mad. I'm not defensive. In many ways, you're right. I affirm you. Yeah. Your anger makes sense, man.
I'm not angry, I'm disappointed.
Yeah,
I keep getting disappointed.
and that makes so much sense.
I'm not angry.
Sorry, I thought you used the word anger.
No,
I thought you said angry.
I'm just saying,
No, yeah.
disappointed.
I wanted, maybe I misheard you. I wanted to use your word and just say that it makes sense. I think I maybe just want to stop there. Not for the night, because there might be more questions, but I don't want to start getting into explain. Colby can typically explain, and it starts to sound defensive. And really, I just want to sort of metaphorically hold you and say that totally makes sense. I would feel the same way, and I meet your disappointment with compassion and not judgment. I don't judge you for that. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain. Sorry for the hurt. Sorry for all the things that have happened in and around you that have led you to this completely legitimate opinion that you just shared in this space so bravely. So bravely.
What do we do different going forward?
What do we do different going forward? Can you say more?
Yeah, just listening to this, right?
Yeah.
I felt that very deeply, you know. And we're all on this journey together. As an ally, I'll never be able to feel that pain. But we want to be part of the solution, right? So it's part of the journey, but we need to do better, we need to do more, and I'm not sure I understand what that is.
So, a couple things. One is it's really important that you hear the question, which was, what do we do moving forward? Because that is all that you can change. That's all that you can do anything about, like realistically. If we had time machines, right, we could go back and we would do things differently, and many of us likely would. And yet some of us wouldn't. By the way, can I just point out that sometimes, maybe more than sometimes, the things in our life that cause the deepest suffering are the moments that we now look back on and say, yeah, but I wouldn't be who I am or where I am today were it not for that. And now I have a kind of gratitude in my life for that. How wild is that? So even if we had time machines, sometimes we'd think we'd want to go back and change, but maybe not. But I think to Mike's point, there were other things we would want to change. Like here's a point I'll make. In my line of work, one of the things I talk about a lot are the 7 lessons I've learned from inclusion. So doing this work for the last 12+ years. And one of the lessons that I've learned is that sooner is always better when it comes to getting out of that name-in. Sooner is always better. This is what I tell pastors and church leaders. I've never met a pastor that has taken their church through inclusion that says, I wish we would have gone slower, or I wish we would have taken longer with it. They all say, I wish I would have started that sooner. A lot of churches, they have leaders, they have pastors that are themselves affirming, but they have not come out to their churches yet. And we could all sort of guess the reasons why. It's very similar to why I sort of lived in that state of disconnect for a year. It's fear of losing livelihood. Guess what? It's a real fear. Like it's real. But I hit that alarm a lot now. Sooner is always better. So we can't go back. We can't change things. But some people say if they could change something, they would do it sooner. So to answer your question about what can we do to move forward, part of it right now is you're doing it by being here now. And I know that's not a super sufficient answer, but the present moment is your life. This is it. You're living it. Like. This is your life right now. The experience that you're having right now is your life right now. And what are you doing with your life right now? You're sitting in a room inside of a church or being a part of a larger conversation of a community that is saying stories like what Mike has shared and experiences that others in this room have felt are not okay. And damn it, we need a world where there's less of those. And to the extent that you can be a part of, and you're doing it by being here, by being a part of this. And I know it's not and I actually mentioned it earlier, I'll go back to it and remind I'm going to make an assumption, straight allies like myself. Look, part of why I do this work, part of why I have conversations with people that want to talk about the Bible and homosexuality or be confrontational with, ex-evangelicals. Part of why I do that is because I know that because of all the layers of identity privilege that I have, I can realistically take a whole bunch of arrows and keep going. And I know that one arrow could take a young queer kid behind me, and the vulnerability of that could take him out. So I'll keep taking them for you. That's one of the ways that I think we can use our privilege in that way, is kind of be a shield for those sorts of things. So, yeah, but you're doing it. You're here. You're showing up. Keep going. I think there was a question back there, yeah.
Okay. Mike, we can empathize with you, but we can never feel exactly what you feel. It's the same with different religions, different cultures, and I think that along with the rest of what's going on in the world today, we all need to open our eyes beyond our own road, beyond our own community, and see what's out there and just try to help. That's it. Try. Learn. I have a transgender child, and when they told me, I was like, okay, fine. My 87-year-old father at the time was like, okay, fine. One of my nephews was not okay, fine. And there was a bad event that happened. But still moving forward, it's the pronoun usage too. People refuse to just use the proper pronoun. And it's so simple. Is it hard to use the word they? It is, because it's not proper English to us. But you know what? It's a lot harder to live as a they in this world than it is for us to just try to use the word. So in my own little world, I just try to, be more compassionate and teach people, my child is a they, and, it's respectful to try to use it. That's all.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
A question from online. Do you have study guides for your books?
Yeah. Yeah. So for Unclobber, the second edition came out 2 years ago, and it's the one that is now for sale. And it has study guides for every single chapter in it. Not for the shift, though. I haven't done a study guide for that. That's an interesting thought. Maybe I'll work on that. But can I go back real quick? Not to correct you, but just to suggest to those who also might, it's about they being a singular versus plural pronoun. Yeah, I'm with you. It's clunky, and it can take some getting used to, but we also do it all the time without even thinking about it.
That's what my child taught me.
We do it all the
If
time.
you find sandals, you would say, whose are those?
Yeah.
Do they belong to?
Yeah.
That's what I try to,
If your cousin's coming over for dinner and I don't know their gender, I say, what time are they coming?
Right.
We do it all the time. What time are they going to get here? When we don't know the gender. So for people that get so hung up on, that's only for plural, it's like, yeah, but you yourself use it and it's fine. You'll be okay.
when you have a child that changes their name at 23 years old,
Yeah.
it takes a while to remember to do that. You want to, but you have to physically think about it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so, I'm sorry, like, everybody can do it if they respect that person and love that person, they can do it.
Yeah, and you know what I found, and this is a broad brush stroke, but I have found that some of the most patient, compassionate, forgiving, kind people are from the queer community. They have taught me so much about patience and kindness and forgiveness, so that's one of my favorite things to talk about too. Yeah, I think, do we have time for like one or two more, Karis? What did you say, 3 o'clock? Yeah.
I have a couple of more, and then we'll do a closeout.
Okay, so the penultimate question right here.
Mine's actually not a question. I'd like to speak to that. First of all, thank you. You haven't even done anything directly, to me, but just seeing people here is really meaningful. But to, everybody in this room moving forward, and even as far as what you just said about patience and gender and changing, grace, giving yourselves grace to not be perfect your first time. You're going to try, and you're likely to mess up. But thank you for trying, and just try again. So, yeah, it
Well
just takes
said.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you all so
it was,
much.
It was Logan, right? Thank you, Logan. So glad you came. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Anyone else? You've been wondering if you're going to say something all night long, and now's your chance.
Yeah, I was recently told my therapist suggested going to a psychiatrist to change meds, and he told me, for a couple of reasons, be proud that you're a survivor. And like I said, for a couple of reasons, a medical reason, and just trauma from childhood trauma, growing in a small town, originally being in a Catholic church, but in my teens, I've changed churches that even back when were more affirming to me. So, yeah, I'm a survivor.
I love that. What's your name?
Tony, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm also proud of you. Well done.
What a time together. And I thank everyone for coming. I tell people this all the time. Pastor Colby, I am the most fortunate pastor
Yeah.
to serve in a congregation that is open to learning and open to me, and we're on this road together. So I say thank you to the people of Community Lutheran as well as the larger church. For you, Pastor Colby, yesterday we sat with Pastor A.J. Hausman during a podcast you did. And she talked about a bit of her own trauma. None of us who come through are untraumatized. And some will say, sadly, well, it's no big deal anymore. Let's get on. But sadly, it doesn't work that way. To you, I say thank you for being part of a resource for me, because every time I am called to educate and talk about being queer and a pastor, and being prior military chaplain and being queer, it re-traumatizes me. And Pastor Hausman said, how do you do it after you've been ordained so long? I'm tired. And I said, oh no, sister, you've got decades. And I say this because people like you, allies, and like you, speak up. And you take it for a while we get back up and we are ready to educate again. So thank you for being an ally. Thank you for being a sibling. Thank you for helping in this thing called life and reassuring that every single person is beloved. No exceptions. Martin Luther, my rock star, he said something, and Pastor Hausman said this. Favorite quote. Here I stand, I can do no other. You are the Martin Luther who is saying, here I stand, I can do no other. I will not, I'm not going to stand down on this. And I want to say thank you for being a good Lutheran, okay? Now then, for those who are visiting today, I get to put on my best evangelical again. This ministry does not happen by mistake. Community Lutheran, not everybody was like on board with this. I mean, everybody was at Community, but I did have outliers who said, you know what? It's too expensive. We can't afford it. But here's the thing. We cannot not afford to do Colby Martin. We cannot not afford to be voices in the wilderness or be people of compassion or get educated. We cannot be those people. We need you. And the only way that we're going to keep educating is if you help us to educate and help us in our many ministries at Community. For those who are online watching Pastor Colby, there's a QR code, and we would be so grateful, like I said in the first service this morning. Just put your phone up there, it'll turn yellow. Put it in for $1 million, okay? All right. Or only takes one. Or for $10, or $1, or $5. Please contribute to the ministries of Community Lutheran Church. And for that, I'm very grateful. How did I do, treasurer, finance people? Good, great. All right. So thank you for this time. We want to get you on the road to Gettysburg as you help inspire the next generation of pastors. And I'm just forever grateful for you, Pastor Colby Martin. And he'll be in the back, and he'll be autographing. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much.